There are gaps in the map of human history, not empty spaces, but places that were once filled with life, with power, with stories. These are the voids left behind by cities that have vanished, swallowed by the earth, drowned by the sea, or simply erased by the relentless march of time. They are the ghosts of our collective past, phantom civilizations that exist in the twilight between myth and memory, continuing to whisper their secrets to those who are willing to listen. This is not a journey to places you can find on a modern globe. It is a journey into the heart of obsession, into the minds of the historians, archaeologists, and adventurers who have dedicated their lives to chasing these whispers. We will follow the faded ink of ancient texts, the glint of gold in a sacred lake, and the faint outline of foundations buried beneath millennia of dust. We seek the truth behind the legends of 5 lost cities, 5 enduring enigmas that still haunt the very people who study our past. These stories are more than just historical curiosities. They are parables of ambition, of hubris, of catastrophe, and of the incredible resilience of an idea. They challenge our understanding of history, blurring the lines between what was real and what was imagined. They force us to ask a fundamental question. How can a place that shaped empires, inspired epic poems, and launched armadas of treasure hunters simply cease to exist? Our journey begins not with stone and mortar, but with a shimmering, intoxicating idea. An idea born in the highlands of South America, an idea so powerful it would drive men mad, decimate populations, and reshape the destiny of a continent. It is the story of a city that was never a city, a kingdom made not of stone, but of pure, unadulterated gold. It is the legend of El Dorado. The name itself is a siren's call, a promise of impossible wealth. For centuries, European explorers, their minds feverish with greed and glory, hacked their way through impenetrable jungles and scaled treacherous mountains in search of it. They were chasing a phantom, a city where the streets were paved with gold, where emeralds were as common as pebbles, and where a king painted himself in precious dust. But the truth of El Dorado is both more fascinating and more tragic than the legend it spawned. To find its origins, we must travel back to the 16th century, to the Altiplano Cundiboyacense of present-day Colombia. This high plateau, a world of misty peaks and serene lakes, was the home of the Muisca people. They were a sophisticated and highly organized civilization, a confederation of tribes that covered an area of over 25,000 square kilometers. At their peak, their population may have numbered as many as 3 million souls, rivaling the great civilizations of Mesoamerica and the Andes. The Muisca were master craftsmen, particularly in the art of goldsmithing. But for them, gold was not a currency of commerce. It was a currency of the sacred. It was a divine conduit, a physical manifestation of the sun's creative energy. They fashioned it into intricate tuños, small votive offerings representing figures, animals, and scenes from their daily lives. These were not symbols of wealth, but prayers made solid, offerings to their pantheon of gods. The heart of their spiritual world was water. The high-altitude lakes that dotted their landscape were considered portals to the realm of the gods. And the most sacred of these was Lake Guatavita, a near-perfect circle of deep, cold water cradled in the crater of an ancient volcano. It was here, at Guatavita, that the ritual that would give birth to a continent-spanning obsession took place. The legend of El Dorado, the Gilded Man, was not about a place, but a person. When a new chief, or Zipa, was to be crowned, he became the central figure in a solemn and spectacular ceremony. The new ruler would be stripped naked, his body coated in a sticky resin. Then Muisca priests would cover him from head to toe in fine gold dust, transforming him into a living statue, a shimmering embodiment of the sun god. He would be led onto a ceremonial raft laden with gold and emeralds and rowed to the center of Lake Guatavita. As the sun rose over the Andean peaks, casting its first rays onto the gilded man, he would dive into the icy water, washing the gold from his body. At the same time, his people, gathered on the shores, would cast their own golden offerings into the lake. It was a profound act of cosmic renewal, a sacrifice to ensure the balance of the universe and the continued prosperity of the Muisca people. This ceremony, a private and sacred affair, was not meant for outside eyes. But in 1537, the outside world arrived with brutal force. A Spanish expedition, led by the conquistador Gonzalo Jiménez de Quesada, clawed its way up from the Caribbean coast, enduring unimaginable hardships. They were a hardened, ruthless group, driven by the same thirst for gold that had toppled the Aztec and Inca empires. When Quesada and his men stumbled upon the Muisca civilization, they found a society rich in the one thing they craved above all else. They saw the Muisca's casual use of gold, not as a sign of spiritual devotion, but as evidence of an inexhaustible source. And they heard whispers, fragmented accounts of the ceremony at Lake Guatavita. In the crucible of their greed, the story of the gilded man was transformed. The man became a king. The king became an emperor. And the ritual became the daily routine of a city of unimaginable wealth. The story that spread like wildfire through the Spanish colonies and back to Europe was of a city named El Dorado, hidden deep in the interior, where gold was so plentiful that it was used to pave the streets. It was a lie, a magnificent and deadly misunderstanding, but it was a lie that men were willing to die for. Quesada himself was the first to fall under its spell. He and his men conquered the Muisca with terrifying efficiency, torturing their leaders to reveal the source of their gold. They plundered temples and tombs, seizing vast quantities of precious artifacts. But they never found the city. The more gold they found, the more they believed the ultimate prize, the city itself, lay just beyond the next river, over the next mountain range. And so began the hunt, one of the most tragic and futile chapters in the history of the Americas. The legend of El Dorado detached from its Muisca origins and became a mobile myth, a moving target for the obsessed. Expeditions plunged into the unknown, chasing rumors and distorted maps. Sebastian de Belalcázar, the conqueror of Quito, marched north from Peru. Nikolaus Federmann, a German in the service of the Welser banking family, marched south from the coast of Venezuela. Both were convinced that El Dorado was within their grasp. These were not scientific expeditions. They were campaigns of plunder, marked by extreme violence against indigenous populations and incredible suffering for the conquistadors themselves. They marched through territory no European had ever seen, battling disease, starvation, and the relentless hostility of the jungle. They followed phantom roads, tortured local guides who told them what they wanted to hear, and died by the hundreds in the swamps and forests of the Amazon basin. The allure of the Golden City was so potent that it even drew one of England's most famous figures into its web, Sir Walter Raleigh. A courtier, poet, and explorer, Raleigh was a quintessential Elizabethan adventurer. By the late 16th century, he had fallen from the Queen's favor and desperately needed to restore his fortune and reputation. He became convinced that El Dorado was not in Colombia, but was in fact the city of Manoa, located in the highlands of Guyana, on the shores of a mythical Lake Parime. Raleigh's belief was based on captured Spanish accounts and his own wishful thinking. In 1595, he led his first expedition to what is now Venezuela. He sailed up the Orinoco River, forging alliances with local tribes who were enemies of the Spanish and gathering stories that seemed to confirm his theories. He wrote a book upon his return, The Discovery of the Large, Rich, and Beautiful Empire of Guyana, which, while a literary success, was filled with exaggerations and unsubstantiated claims. He never found his city of gold, but the obsession never left him. Years later, imprisoned in the Tower of London, he managed to persuade King James I to allow him one last chance. In 1617, an aging and frail Raleigh led a second, ill-fated expedition. The venture was a disaster. His men, against his orders and the king's explicit command not to antagonize the Spanish, attacked a Spanish outpost. In the fighting, Raleigh's own son, Wat, was killed. Heartbroken and defeated, Raleigh returned to England empty-handed. The Spanish, enraged by the attack, demanded his punishment. King James, eager to maintain peace with Spain, reinstated Raleigh's long-dormant death sentence. In 1618, the man who had chased the Golden City across the ocean was beheaded in London. The quest for El Dorado had claimed its most famous victim. For centuries, the search continued, a testament to the enduring power of the myth. Even attempts to drain Lake Guatavita were made, most notably by the Spanish merchant Antonio de Sepúlveda in the 1580s. He used a system of human chains with buckets to lower the water level, succeeding in exposing the shoreline and recovering a significant amount of gold, including a magnificent emerald. But the deep center of the lake, where the most sacred offerings lay, remained beyond his reach. The lake guarded its secrets. In the modern era, the search for El Dorado has transformed. The adventurers with their swords and muskets have been replaced by archaeologists with ground-penetrating radar and historians with a more nuanced understanding of the past. The focus is no longer on finding a city of gold, which historians universally agree never existed, but on understanding the Muisca civilization that inspired the legend. Archaeological work in and around Lake Guatavita continues to yield incredible insights. While the Colombian government has banned any further attempts to drain or dredge the lake to protect its cultural heritage, artifacts still surface. The most famous of these is the Muisca raft, a stunning gold votive object discovered in a cave south of Bogotá in 1969. It depicts the very ceremony of the Gilded Man. A central figure, larger than the others, stands on a raft surrounded by his attendants. It is a perfect miniature of the ritual, a tangible link to the historical reality behind the myth. Today, historians see the El Dorado legend not as a guide to a lost city, but as a powerful lens through which to view the European conquest of the Americas. It is a story of cultural misunderstanding on a catastrophic scale. The Spanish, blinded by a worldview that equated gold with monetary wealth and power, were simply incapable of understanding the Muisca's sacred relationship with the metal. They saw a treasure to be plundered, not a prayer to be respected. The legend is also a stark reminder of the destructive power of greed. The quest for El Dorado left a trail of death and devastation across South America. Countless indigenous lives were lost, entire cultures were shattered, and the natural environment was irrevocably scarred. The conquistadors who chased the golden phantom found only misery, disease, and death. El Dorado was a mirage that led an entire generation of explorers to their doom. And what of the Muisca? Like so many indigenous groups, their population was decimated by European diseases and the violence of the conquest. Their political structures were dismantled, their religion suppressed. Yet they endured. Today, Muisca descendants still live in the highlands around Bogotá. In the 2006 census, over 7,500 people identified as Muisca, and they are actively working to reclaim their language, their traditions, and their sacred sites, including the very lake that gave birth to the world's most enduring legend of wealth. El Dorado still haunts us, not with the promise of gold, but with the weight of its history. It is a ghost built from greed, a city that existed only in the fevered imaginations of conquerors. It reminds us that the greatest treasures are not always made of gold, and that the most valuable things we can lose are the stories and cultures of the people who came before us. The Gilded Man has long since washed the gold from his skin, but the stain of his legend remains on the pages of history. From a legend born of a real ceremony, we now journey to a story that may have been pure invention from its very beginning. We travel from the jungles of South America to the intellectual heart of the ancient world, to Athens in the 4th century BCE. Here, in the shadow of the Acropolis, the philosopher Plato crafted a tale that would eclipse all other lost city legends. A story that has captivated scholars, mystics, and dreamers for over 2 millennia. This is the story of Atlantis. Plato first described the island nation in 2 of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE. He presents the story not as a myth of his own making, but as a historical account passed down through generations, originating with the great Athenian lawgiver Solon, who in turn heard it from Egyptian priests. This framing as a piece of lost history is what has given the tale of Atlantis its incredible staying power. According to Plato's account, Atlantis was a formidable naval power located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the ancient term for the Strait of Gibraltar. This placed it in the Atlantic Ocean, a vast and mysterious expanse to the ancient Greeks. The island was a gift from Poseidon, the god of the sea, to his mortal lover, Cleito. Together, they had 5 pairs of twin sons, and the firstborn, Atlas, became the first king of Atlantis, lending the island and the surrounding ocean his name. Plato's description of the city is breathtaking in its detail. The capital was a marvel of engineering and architecture. It was composed of concentric rings of land and water, created by Poseidon himself to protect his beloved. The rings were connected by bridges and a grand canal that ran from the sea to the central citadel, where the royal palace and a magnificent temple to Poseidon stood. The city was rich in natural resources. It had forests for timber, mines for precious metals like gold, silver, and the mysterious aurichalcum, which Plato describes as glowing with a red light. The land was incredibly fertile, supporting 2 harvests a year, and was home to a diverse array of animals, including elephants. The Atlanteans were not just wealthy, they were technologically and culturally advanced. They had a powerful army and a vast fleet of warships, and their influence extended into Europe and Africa. For generations, the Atlanteans lived in a state of utopian virtue. They were wise, noble, and just, valuing wisdom and community over material wealth. But as time passed, their divine nature became diluted with mortal blood. The fatal flaw of hubris began to creep into their character. They grew arrogant, greedy, and corrupt. Their ambition turned to conquest, and they sought to enslave the rest of the known world. According to Plato's tale, it was ancient Athens in a prehistoric, idealized form that stood against the might of the Atlantean Empire. The Athenians, though outnumbered, fought with courage and virtue and ultimately defeated the invaders, liberating the peoples they had conquered. But divine retribution was coming for Atlantis. Zeus, seeing the corruption of the once noble civilization, gathered the gods to pass judgment. And in a single terrible day and night of misfortune, violent earthquakes and floods struck the island, and Atlantis was swallowed by the sea, vanishing from the face of the earth forever. This is the story as Plato told it. For centuries, it was largely understood as what it most likely was, a philosophical allegory. Plato was using the story of Atlantis as a vehicle for his own ideas. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of imperial ambition and moral decay. The story served as a thought experiment, contrasting the corrupt, materialistic, and powerful Atlantean empire with Plato's vision of an ideal, virtuous state represented by ancient Athens. It was a parable about the eternal conflict between order and chaos, virtue and hubris, and the inevitable punishment for defying the gods. For nearly 2,000 years, this was the prevailing interpretation. But in the 19th century, a new wave of interest in the legend began to build. In 1882, an American writer and amateur politician named Ignatius Donnelly published Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Donnelly's book was a sensation. He argued passionately that Atlantis was not a myth, but a real place, a lost continent that was the mother culture of all subsequent ancient civilizations, from the Egyptians to the Mayans. Donnelly marshaled a vast array of supposed evidence, from linguistic similarities and flood myths across different cultures to the distribution of flora and fauna. His methods were unscientific, and his conclusions were based on speculation and coincidence, but his book captured the public imagination. He single-handedly revived the search for a literal, physical Atlantis, transforming it from a philosophical tale into a historical mystery to be solved. Donnelly opened the floodgates. In the decades that followed, countless theories about the location of Atlantis were proposed. It was placed everywhere from the Americas and Antarctica to the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. The legend was co-opted by mystics and occultists who saw Atlantis as a home for a spiritually advanced race with psychic powers and crystal technology. The story became a canvas onto which people could project their own beliefs and fantasies. But amidst the French theories and wild speculation, a more credible scientific hypothesis began to emerge, one that would tie Plato's story not to a lost continent, but to a real-world cataclysm in the Mediterranean. This theory takes us to the Aegean Sea, to the beautiful Greek island of Santorini. Today, Santorini is famous for its stunning sunsets and whitewashed villages clinging to the cliffs of a vast caldera. But that caldera is a scar, the remnant of one of the most violent volcanic eruptions in human history. Around 1600 BCE, some 1,200 years before Plato wrote his dialogues, Santorini, then known as Thera, was home to a flourishing and sophisticated civilization, the Minoans. The Minoan civilization, centered on the nearby island of Crete, was the dominant power in the Bronze Age Aegean. They were not a warlike people, but a society of traders, sailors, and artists, known for their vibrant frescoes, complex palaces, and extensive trade networks. On Thera, the Minoan settlement of Akrotiri was a thriving port city. Archaeological excavations, which began in the 1960s, have revealed a city of incredible sophistication, frozen in time like a Bronze Age Pompeii. The eruption of the Thera volcano was so sudden that it buried Akrotiri in a thick layer of ash and pumice, preserving it in stunning detail. Archaeologists have unearthed multi-story buildings with indoor plumbing, paved streets, and rooms adorned with magnificent frescoes depicting scenes of nature, maritime life, and religious ceremonies. Akrotiri reveals a society of great wealth, artistry, and technological prowess. It was an urban center that was, in many ways, far ahead of its time. But its existence was cut short by the volcano. The eruption, one of the largest the world has ever seen, was an event of almost unimaginable power. It blew the center out of the island of Thera, creating the caldera we see today. It sent a plume of ash tens of kilometers into the atmosphere, which would have plunged the region into darkness and caused significant climate disruption. More devastatingly, the collapse of the volcano's magma chamber triggered a series of colossal tsunamis that radiated across the Aegean. Waves, possibly hundreds of feet high, would have slammed into the northern coast of Crete, the heartland of the Minoan civilization. These waves would have annihilated coastal towns, destroyed fleets of ships, and salinized agricultural land far inland. The eruption of Thera didn't just destroy Akrotiri, it dealt a catastrophic blow to the entire Minoan civilization, from which it would never fully recover. This is where the theory connects to Atlantis. Many scholars, starting with the Greek archaeologist Spiridon Maranatos, who began the excavations at Akrotiri, have proposed that the Minoan eruption was the historical event that inspired Plato's story. The parallels are striking. A powerful, advanced island civilization, dominant in its region, is suddenly destroyed by a natural cataclysm involving the sea. The memory of such a traumatic event could easily have been passed down through generations, first through oral tradition and then perhaps recorded by the Egyptians, who had extensive trade links with the Minoans. Over the centuries, the story would have been embellished and distorted. The island of Thera could have become the continent of Atlantis. The time scale could have been exaggerated from 900 years before Solon's time to 9,000. The details of the Minoan civilization's collapse could have been woven into a moralistic tale about divine punishment. Is the Minoan theory the definitive answer? It's impossible to say for certain. There are discrepancies. Plato located Atlantis in the Atlantic, not the Aegean. He describes a massive continent, not a small island. And he speaks of an empire that was warlike and expansionist, which doesn't quite fit with the current archaeological picture of the relatively peaceful Minoans. These inconsistencies have led to other theories. Some have pointed to the destruction of the Greek city of Helika in 373 BCE, which was destroyed by an earthquake and tsunami and sank into the Corinthian Gulf. This event happened just before Plato wrote his dialogues and would have been fresh in his mind. It's possible that he combined the recent local event of Helika's destruction with the more ancient, grander memory of the Minoan collapse to create his fictional narrative. And the search for other locations continues, often in the realms of pseudo-archaeology. The mysterious underwater rock formations of the Bimini Road in the Bahamas, the eye-catching Richat structure in Mauritania, these and many other sites have been claimed as the remnants of Atlantis. But none have stood up to rigorous scientific scrutiny. Modern geology and our understanding of plate tectonics have made the idea of a large continent suddenly sinking into the ocean a virtual impossibility. So, where does that leave us? The most likely explanation remains that Atlantis was a work of fiction, a brilliant philosophical tool created by one of history's greatest minds. But it was a fiction likely inspired by real historical traumas, with the destruction of the Minoan civilization on Thera being the most compelling candidate. The story's power lies in this very ambiguity, in the space it leaves for us to wonder, what if? Atlantis is more than a lost city. It's a lost ideal. It represents a collective human yearning for a golden age, a time of peace, wisdom, and technological brilliance. Its destruction is a potent symbol of our deepest fears, that our own hubris, our own technology, our own moral failings could lead to our own sudden and complete annihilation. It is a mirror in which we see both our highest aspirations and our greatest anxieties. The search for Atlantis today is less an archaeological quest and more a cultural and philosophical one. It continues not because we expect to find the ruins of a sunken super city, but because the story speaks to something fundamental within us. It is the ultimate ghost story of history, a tale of a perfect world lost to the depths, forever haunting the shores of our imagination. From a city that was likely a product of imagination, we now turn to one that was immortalized by poetry, a place that for centuries was believed to be as mythical as Atlantis itself. Its name echoes through the ages, synonymous with epic war, tragic heroes, and a cunning act of deception. We travel to the windswept plains of modern-day Turkey, to the site of a legendary conflict that has captivated the Western world for 3,000 years. This is the story of Troy. For most of recorded history, the Trojan War was a story, not a historical event. It was the subject of Homer's Iliad, one of the foundational texts of Western literature. Composed around the 8th century BCE, the epic poem tells the tale of a 10-year siege, a brutal and bloody conflict between the Achaeans, a coalition of Greek kingdoms, and the defenders of the great city of Troy, located on the coast of Anatolia. The catalyst for the war was the abduction, or elopement, of Helen, the queen of Sparta and the most beautiful woman in the world, with Paris, a prince of Troy. Helen's husband, King Menelaus, and his powerful brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, assembled a massive army to sail across the Aegean and bring her back. The war that followed was a clash of titans, a stage for legendary heroes whose names still resonate with power. The swift and godlike Achilles, the noble and tragic Hector, the wise Odysseus, the mighty Ajax. Homer's account is a rich tapestry of divine intervention, human passion, and the brutal realities of Bronze Age warfare. The gods of Olympus take sides, manipulating events on the battlefield. The poem focuses on a brief but pivotal period in the final year of the siege, detailing the rage of Achilles and his devastating impact on the war. The Iliad ends with the funeral of Hector, but the wider story, including the famous tale of the Trojan horse, was told in other poems of the epic cycle, which have since been largely lost. For the ancient Greeks and Romans, the Trojan War was their foundational history, as real to them as any other event of their past. They traced their ancestry back to its heroes. But as the centuries passed and the age of myth gave way to the age of scientific inquiry, skepticism began to grow. By the 19th century, most scholars had concluded that the Trojan War and the city of Troy itself were nothing more than a brilliant fiction, a creation of Homer's poetic genius. The city was considered as real as the mythical Mount Olympus. There was no archaeological evidence, no historical record outside of the epics themselves. But the story had a powerful hold on the imagination of one man, a man whose obsession would change the course of archaeology forever. His name was Heinrich Schliemann. Born in Germany in 1822, Schliemann was a successful businessman who made a fortune as a merchant. But his true passion, ignited in his childhood, was for the epics of Homer. He claimed that his father had told him the story of Troy as a boy, and he had vowed then and there that one day he would find the lost city. Schliemann was a romantic, an amateur, and a relentless self-promoter. He was not a trained archaeologist, and his methods would be considered shockingly destructive by today's standards. But he possessed an unshakable belief in the historical accuracy of the Iliad. He treated Homer's poem not as literature, but as a literal guidebook, a map that would lead him to the lost city. After retiring from business, a wealthy man, Schliemann dedicated his life and his fortune to his quest. Based on the geographical descriptions in the Iliad, he became convinced that Troy was located at a specific hill in northwestern Turkey called Hisarlik. The site was a large man-made mound, suggesting that it held the ruins of ancient settlements. Previous amateur explorers had suggested the location, but it was Schliemann who had the resources and the single-minded determination to excavate it on a massive scale. In 1871, he began his work. With a large team of local laborers, he essentially blasted his way through the hill. He was not interested in carefully uncovering the layers of history one by one. He was looking for Homer's Troy, the city of King Priam, and he believed it must be at the very bottom of the mound. He dug a huge, crude trench straight through the center of the site, destroying vast amounts of valuable archaeological material from the upper, later settlements in the process. His methods were brutal, but they yielded results. Schliemann uncovered the ruins not of one city, but of a whole series of cities, built one on top of another over a period of thousands of years. The hill of Hisarlik was an archaeological layer cake, a record of continuous settlement from the early Bronze Age to the Roman period. Then, in 1873, Schliemann made the discovery that would make him world famous. Near the base of his excavations, he unearthed an incredible cache of gold and other precious artifacts. It included golden diadems, necklaces, earrings, buttons, and a spectacular golden headdress. He was convinced that he had found the treasure of King Priam, the legendary ruler of Troy during the war. He famously had his young Greek wife, Sophia, wear the jewels for a photograph that was published around the world. Schliemann declared to the world that he had found Troy. The discovery of Priam's treasure was a global sensation. It seemed to prove that Homer's epic was not a myth, but a true story. However, Schliemann's triumph was clouded by controversy. He had smuggled the treasure out of Turkey in violation of his excavation permit with the Ottoman government, leading to a lengthy legal battle. And more importantly, later archaeological analysis revealed a critical flaw in his conclusion. The layer in which he found the treasure, a level now known as Troy II, was dated to around 2400 BCE. This was more than 1,000 years before the traditional date of the Trojan War, which is generally placed in the late Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE. The magnificent treasure Schliemann found did not belong to Priam. It belonged to a much earlier, unknown king. In his haste to find Homer's city, Schliemann had dug right past it, destroying much of it in the process. Despite his flawed methods and erroneous conclusions, Schliemann's work was a landmark achievement. He proved that there was a historical basis for the city of Troy, and that the site was indeed historic. His discoveries kick-started the field of Bronze Age Aegean archaeology and demonstrated that myths and legends could contain kernels of historical truth. After Schliemann, more scientific and systematic excavations were carried out at the site by archaeologists like Wilhelm Dörpfeld and Carl Bliegen. They meticulously unraveled the complex stratigraphy of the site, identifying 9 main archaeological layers, or cities, labeled Troy I through Troy I9, with numerous sublayers. Scholars now believe that the city of the Iliad, if it existed, is most likely to be found in the layers known as Troy 6 or Troy 7a. Troy 6 was a magnificent city, dating from around 1700 to 1250 BCE. It was a large, wealthy, and heavily fortified settlement with impressive defensive walls, towers, and grand houses. It fits the description of Homer's well-walled Troy and city of wide streets. This prosperous city, however, appears to have been destroyed by a major earthquake, not by war. Built directly on top of its ruins is the layer known as Troy 7a, which dates to the mid to late 13th century BCE, a period that aligns perfectly with the traditional chronology of the Trojan War. The evidence found in this layer is tantalizing. The city was rebuilt quickly and more densely than its predecessor, with houses crammed inside the citadel walls, suggesting a population under threat. Most significantly, Troy 7a shows clear evidence of a violent destruction by fire. Human remains have been found in the streets, and arrowheads have been discovered embedded in the walls. It seems to have been destroyed in a siege. This evidence has led most modern scholars to agree that Troy 7a is the most likely candidate for the historical Troy of the Trojan War. The city at Hisarlik was a major Bronze Age power, strategically located to control the Dardanelles, the vital waterway connecting the Aegean and Black Seas. It would have been a major prize, and a war over control of trade routes is a far more plausible historical reason for conflict than the abduction of a beautiful queen. So, was the Trojan War real? The answer is complex. There was almost certainly a real city of Troy. And it appears that this city was destroyed in a war around the time that the legends place the conflict. It is likely that a historical conflict, perhaps a series of raids or a major siege over trade and resources, became the kernel of truth around which Homer and other bards wove their epic tale. But the Iliad is not a history textbook. The 10-year siege, the divine interventions, the specific exploits of heroes like Achilles and Hector, these are most likely the elements of poetic creation, added over centuries of oral storytelling to transform a messy historical conflict into a timeless drama of human honor, rage, and destiny. The search for Troy is a perfect example of how myth and archaeology can have a complex and fruitful relationship. The legend inspired the search, and the archaeological discoveries have, in turn, provided a historical context for the legend. The city that was once dismissed as a fantasy has been restored to the map of the ancient world. Today, Troy is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and archaeological work continues. Recent excavations have revealed that the city was much larger than even Schliemann imagined, with a substantial lower town protected by a defensive ditch. This confirms its status as a major regional power, a city worth fighting a war over. Troy no longer haunts historians as a completely lost city. Its location is known, its ruins can be walked among. But it remains haunted by questions. How much of Homer's epic is history? Who were the real people who fought and died on these plains? The ghost of Troy is not in its location, but in the unbridgeable gap between its spectacular myth and its fragmented, complex reality. The walls of Hisarlik have been found, but the true story of the Trojan War may forever be lost to the poet's song and the dust of millennia. From a city found through a poem, we return to the theme of cities lost to the sea. But this time, we are not chasing a philosophical allegory like Atlantis. We are searching for a real place, a city that was once a leader of the ancient Greek world, a place that suffered a fate so similar to the mythical Atlantis that many believe it was the direct inspiration for Plato's tale. This is the story of Helike, the real-life Atlantis of ancient Greece. Long before Plato wrote of a continent sinking beneath the waves, the ancient Greeks knew the story of a city that had actually suffered that very fate. Helike was located in Achaia on the southwestern shore of the Gulf of Corinth. In the 4th century BCE, it was not some backwater town. It was a prosperous and influential city-state, a leader of the First Achaean League, a confederation of 12 cities that was a major political force in the region. Helike was an ancient city with a history stretching back into the Bronze Age. It was particularly famous for its sanctuary dedicated to Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes. This temple was so revered that it was known throughout the Greek world, and people would travel from far and wide to worship there. The city's prominence was such that it founded colonies of its own, including the famous city of Sybaris in southern Italy. But Helic's devotion to the god of earthquakes would not save it. In the winter of 373 BCE, disaster struck. The ancient writers describe a series of terrifying portents. For 5 days, strange phenomena were observed. Columns of fire were seen in the sky, and animals, from snakes and weasels to mice, were seen fleeing the city and heading for the hills. The creatures of the earth knew something was wrong. Then, on a single catastrophic night, it happened. A massive earthquake of incredible force struck the region. The ground beneath Helike, which was built on unstable alluvial soil, instantly liquefied. The entire city collapsed and sank into the earth. Immediately following the earthquake, a colossal tsunami, generated by the seismic shock and submarine landslides in the Gulf, roared ashore and completely submerged the ruins. By morning, the city of Helike, one of the leading powers of its day, had vanished. The destruction was so complete and so sudden that it shocked the ancient world. The writer Pausanias, visiting the area some 500 years later, wrote that the city was swallowed up by the winter sea. He and other writers, like the Roman historian Aelian, recorded that for centuries after the event, the submerged ruins of Helike were still visible from boats on calm days. Fishermen reported snagging their nets on the bronze statue of Poseidon, still standing in his submerged temple. The story of Helike's destruction became a famous cautionary tale in antiquity, a stark reminder of the awesome and unpredictable power of the gods, particularly Poseidon. The ancient Greeks offered a reason for the disaster. They claimed the people of Helike had committed an act of sacrilege. They had refused to give a statue or even a model of their famous Poseidon temple to a group of Ionian colonists, and had even murdered their ambassadors. The destruction of the city was seen as Poseidon's divine retribution for this act of hubris. This detail is tantalizingly similar to Plato's account of Atlantis, which was also destroyed as a punishment for the moral decay and hubris of its people. The timing is also crucial. Helike was destroyed in 373 BCE. Plato wrote his dialogues about Atlantis around 360 BCE, just over a decade later. The memory of Helike's terrifying and sudden disappearance would have been fresh in the minds of everyone in the Greek world, including Plato and his audience in Athens. It is highly probable that the real historical event of Helike's destruction directly informed or inspired Plato's fictional story of Atlantis. As the centuries passed and the Roman Empire fell, the story of Helike faded. The silt and sediment flowing from the nearby rivers gradually buried the ruins deeper and deeper. The coastline changed, and the memory of the city's exact location was lost. Like Atlantis, Helike became a ghost, a lost city that was known only from ancient texts. For centuries, treasure hunters and early explorers searched for the submerged ruins, but they were looking in the wrong place. Based on the ancient accounts, they searched the deep waters of the Corinthian Gulf, but they found nothing. The city, it seemed, was lost for good. The modern search for Heelike began in 1988 with the launch of the Heelike Project, a collaboration between Greek and American archaeologists led by Dora Katsanopoulos and Steven Soter. The team took a different approach. They hypothesized that the ancient writers' accounts of a city in the sea might be misleading. They theorized that the city was not in the deep Gulf, but had been submerged in an inland lagoon that had since been filled in with river sediment. Their search was a painstaking archaeological detective story. They used ancient texts, geological analysis, and borehole drilling to try and pinpoint the location. For over a decade, they drilled core samples across the coastal plain, searching for a destruction layer of pottery and debris that would indicate the site of the lost city. They faced numerous setbacks and false starts, but they persisted. Then, in the summer of 2001, they made a breakthrough. Near the modern village of Rizomoulos, several hundred meters inland from the current coastline, their drills brought up fragments of classical-era pottery and building materials from several meters below the ground. They had found it. The team began to excavate, and what they uncovered was the archaeological signature of the catastrophe of 373 BCE. They found a destruction layer filled with cobblestones, crushed roof tiles, and pottery, all jumbled together in a matrix of dark clay, clear evidence of a city destroyed by an earthquake and submerged under lagoonal waters. They had found Heelike, not in the sea, but buried under the fertile farmland of the coastal plain. The discovery was a stunning confirmation of their hypothesis and a landmark moment in Mediterranean archaeology. Since that initial discovery, excavations have continued to reveal the secrets of the lost city. They have unearthed the remains of buildings, city walls, and a well-planned street grid from the classical period. The artifacts they have found, from loom weights and lamps to fine pottery, provide a snapshot of daily life in a Greek city just moments before it was annihilated. The Heelike project has also revealed that the site was occupied for thousands of years. Beneath the classical city, they have found an extensive and well-preserved early Bronze Age settlement, dating back to the 3rd millennium BCE. This earlier city, with its large corridor houses and fortifications, was also destroyed by an earthquake, a testament to the seismically active nature of the region. In recent years, one of the most significant discoveries has been the unearthing of an 8th century BCE temple, likely an early temple to Poseidon from the geometric period. The finds from this temple, including clay figurines, bronze animal figures, and a rare gold bead, confirm Heelike's long history as a major religious center, just as the ancient text described. The discovery of Heelike is profoundly important. It is a story of a lost city found, a mystery solved through a combination of textual analysis, geological science, and persistent archaeological fieldwork. It provides a firm historical anchor for the kind of catastrophe that Plato described in his Atlantis story, making the link between the two almost undeniable. But the work is far from over. Excavating a city buried under meters of silt is a slow and expensive process. The water table is high, meaning the archaeologists are often working in mud and water. Only a small fraction of the ancient city has been uncovered. The great temple of Poseidon from the classical era, the one that fishermen supposedly snagged their nets on, has yet to be found. It remains buried somewhere beneath the plain, waiting to be rediscovered. Heelike haunts historians in a different way than Atlantis. It is not a phantom of the imagination, but a tangible reality that was lost and has been found again. It is a ghost that has been given a physical form, but one that is still only partially visible. It haunts us with the knowledge of what is still buried, the stories and secrets of a major Greek city that are still locked in the earth. It is a powerful reminder that the ground beneath our feet is a library of history, and that sometimes, with the right key, the stories of the lost can be read once more. Our final journey takes us from the depths of the sea to the heart of the world's largest desert. We leave behind the solid evidence of archaeology for the shimmering whispers of legend, to a place that may never have been more than a traveler's dream. We are searching for a phantom oasis, a city of white walls and impossible beauty, hidden somewhere in the vast, unforgiving emptiness of the Sahara. This is the quest for Zerzura. The Sahara Desert is one of the most inhospitable places on Earth, a sea of sand and rock the size of the United States. For millennia, it has been a barrier to travel, a place of death and desolation. But it has also been a place of secrets, a landscape that sparks the imagination with visions of hidden paradises and forgotten cities buried beneath the dunes. The most enduring of these visions is the legend of Zerzura, the oasis of little birds. The story speaks of a lost city or oasis, a place of incredible wealth and lushness, located somewhere deep in the Libyan desert, the vast expanse of the eastern Sahara. The details of the legend vary, but they all paint a picture of a miraculous sanctuary in the middle of the wasteland. The earliest written accounts of Zerzura date back to the 13th century. A 15th century Arabic manuscript, the Kitab al-Kunuz, or Book of Hidden Pearls, gives one of the most famous descriptions. It speaks of the city of Zerzura, a place with white walls, a gate carved with the figure of a bird, and houses filled with treasure. The book warns that the city is guarded by black giants who prevent anyone from entering or leaving. Inside, a king and queen lie sleeping, waiting to be awoken. These early tales are a blend of folklore and treasure hunting guide. They are fantastical, but they hint at the possibility of a real place, a lost settlement that had been reclaimed by the desert. For centuries, the story of Zerzura remained a local legend, a tale told by Bedouin traders and oasis dwellers. The legend entered the European imagination in 1835 when the English Egyptologist John Gardner Wilkinson published his Topography of Thebes and General View of Egypt. In his book, he recounted the story of an Arab man who, while searching for a lost camel, stumbled upon a deep wadi, a dry riverbed with an oasis in it. He found ruins of a small city, springs of water, and an abundance of palm trees. The man took dates from the oasis to prove his story, but he could never find his way back. Wilkinson's account lit a fire under a new generation of European explorers. The 19th and early 20th centuries were an age of exploration, a time when the last blank spaces on the map were being filled in. The vast, uncharted Libyan desert was one of the final frontiers. The legend of Zerzura provided a romantic and compelling goal for those brave or foolish enough to venture into its depths. The search for Zerzura became an obsession for a particular brand of adventurer, the gentleman explorer of the early 20th century. These were men of means, often military officers or academics who were drawn to the desert's challenge and its mystique. They formed an informal group dubbed the Zerzura Club, which met in a Cairo bar to swap stories and plan expeditions. The most famous and most driven of these explorers was the Hungarian Count Laszlo Almasi. A pilot, desert explorer, and controversial figure, Almasi would later be immortalized, in a highly fictionalized form, as the protagonist of the novel and film The English Patient. The real Almasi was utterly captivated by the Zerzura legend and dedicated years of his life to finding it. Almasi and his contemporaries were pioneers of a new kind of exploration. They used motorized vehicles, specially adapted Ford Model A's, and small aircraft to traverse the vast distances of the desert. Their expeditions were a mix of scientific inquiry, adventure, and often intelligence gathering for their respective European governments in the tense years leading up to World War II. Almasi believed that Zerzura was not a single city, but a complex of 3 hidden wadis or valleys, located somewhere in the remote and forbidding Gilf Kabir Plateau, a massive tableland of sandstone in the far southwest of Egypt. He based his theory on his interpretation of ancient texts and the accounts of local guides. In 1932, an expedition led by Pat Clayton, which included Almasi, discovered a series of wadis with surprising amounts of vegetation in the Gils Kabir. These discoveries, made possible by aerial reconnaissance, were a major breakthrough in the mapping of the region. Almasi became convinced that these valleys were the basis of the Zerzura legend. He named them Wadi Tal, Wadi Abd el-Malik, and Wadi Hamra. While they were not a white city filled with treasure, they were green oases of life in a desolate landscape, places that could have supported a small settlement and given rise to the legend. Almasi's most famous discovery came a year later, in 1933, when he was led by a local guide to a site in the Uvanat Mountains south of the Gilf Kabir. There, he found a cave filled with prehistoric rock art, including paintings of figures that appeared to be swimming. He named it the Cave of Swimmers. This incredible discovery was evidence that the Sahara had not always been the arid desert it is today. Thousands of years ago, during a period known as the African Humid Period, or Green Sahara, the region was a savanna filled with lakes, rivers, and abundant wildlife. This discovery provides the most plausible explanation for the Zerzura legend. The story is likely not about a single lost city, but is a composite folk memory, a collection of stories passed down through countless generations, recalling a time when the desert was a more hospitable place. The White City could be a memory of ancient oasis settlements, built of light-colored stone or salt flats, that were abandoned as the climate changed and the desert expanded. The trans-Saharan trade routes have existed for millennia. Caravans would have traveled between a network of oases, some of which may have been lost to shifting sands or dwindling water sources. The story of Zerzura could be a garbled memory of one of these lost way stations, its wealth and beauty exaggerated with each retelling. In the modern era, the tools of exploration have changed again. Satellite imagery and remote sensing technology have allowed archaeologists to map the Sahara in unprecedented detail. This technology has revealed the faint traces of ancient river systems, lake beds, and even potential settlement sites, all hidden beneath the sand. It has confirmed the existence of the Green Sahara and shown that the region once supported significant populations. No definitive archaeological evidence of a single city of Zerzura, as described in the Book of Hidden Pearls, has ever been found. The romantic notion of a sleeping king and queen in a city of treasure remains firmly in the realm of legend. But the search for Zerzura was not fruitless. It led to the mapping of one of the world's last unexplored regions. It led to the discovery of incredible prehistoric art that rewrote our understanding of the Sahara's climate history. And it inspired a generation of explorers who pushed the boundaries of human endurance. Zerzura still haunts us, not as a physical place to be found, but as a symbol of the desert's secrets. It is a ghost of a greener, wetter past. It reminds us that landscapes are not static, that even the most desolate places on Earth once teemed with life. The white oasis may be a mirage, but the historical truth it points to, of a lost world hidden not by the sea but by the sands of time, is very real. The little birds of Zerzura may no longer sing, but the echo of their legend still calls out from the silent heart of the desert. 5 cities, 5 stories, a gilded man in a sacred lake, a sunken continent of utopian dreams, a poetic battlefield of gods and heroes, a real city swallowed by the earth and sea, and a phantom oasis in an endless desert. El Dorado, Atlantis, Troy, Helika, Zerzura. They are separated by geography, by history, and by the very nature of their existence, ranging from historical fact to philosophical fiction. Yet, they are united by a common thread, their power to captivate the human imagination. Why do we continue to search for these lost places? The answer, perhaps, is that we are not just searching for ruins of stone and gold. We are searching for something less tangible. In the story of El Dorado, we see a reflection of our own complex relationship with wealth and the destructive potential of unchecked greed. The hunt for the Golden City was a fool's errand, but the historical reality of the Muisca people offers a more profound treasure, a worldview where value was spiritual, not material. In the enduring myth of Atlantis, we search for a lost golden age, a utopia that we hoped once existed, proving that humanity is capable of greatness. But it is also a cautionary tale that resonates deeply in our modern world. The story of a technologically advanced civilization that destroys itself through its own hubris is a ghost that haunts our own atomic and environmental age. We search for Atlantis because we are searching for a better version of ourselves, and we fear we are on the path to its same fate. Troy represents a different kind of search, the quest to connect our foundational stories with our physical past. The discovery of the historical city at Hisarlik did not diminish the power of Homer's epic, it enriched it. It proved that behind our greatest myths there can be a core of truth. The search for Troy is a search for our own roots, for the historical bedrock upon which our culture is built. Helike is the ghost that proves the stories can be real. It is the tangible link between myth and geology, the real-life Atlantis that reminds us of the terrifying power of the natural world. Its rediscovery is a triumph of modern science and archaeology, a story that tells us that the lost are not always lost forever. The search for Helike is a search for answers, for the concrete evidence that can solve the riddles of the past. And in the whispers of Zerzura, we find the romance of the unknown. It is a story born of the most extreme landscape on Earth, a testament to our need to believe that even in the most desolate places, there is a secret to be found, a sanctuary to be discovered. The search for Zerzura is a search for wonder, for the thrill of exploration, and for a connection to a world that has vanished due to the slow, inexorable forces of climate change. These cities, whether real or imagined, are more than just archaeological puzzles. They are mirrors. They reflect our hopes, our fears, our ambitions, and our follies. They are the gaps in our history that we fill with our own stories. They haunt historians and archaeologists not just because they are unsolved, but because they challenge the very limits of our knowledge. They remind us that history is not a complete and finished book, but a dynamic and ongoing investigation, with many pages still missing and many more yet to be written. The search will continue. New technologies will allow us to see beneath the oceans and the sands in ways we never thought possible. New discoveries will be made and old theories will be revised. But the allure of the lost city will never fade. Because in searching for them, we are, in the end, searching for a deeper understanding of ourselves and our fragile, fleeting place in the grand, mysterious story of the world.